The U.S. Department of Defense on Wednesday officially notified the U.S. Congress of the plan to sell Taiwan 66 F-16 fighters and relevant equipment worth around $8 billion and to provide support. Beijing has urged the U.S. to stop the arms sales and to end military contact with Taiwan and vows to impose sanctions on U.S. firms involved in the sale as part of necessary measures to safeguard its own interests. What's behind continuing arms sales from the United States to Taiwan, and why has the deal been approved now? And how will it affect both the cross-Strait relations and China-U.S. relations? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Victor Gao Zhikai, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. And we'll also speak to Richard White, security expert at Extremism, the global consultancy, via satellite from Washington, D.C. In the second half of the program, we'll be joined by current affairs commentator Anna Tangen to talk about the recent violence and rise of extremism in America. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, Victor. The Chinese government is very, very angry with the latest arms sales to Taiwan. It's the largest amount since 1945, the founding of the PRC. What do you think of the impact?
Well, definitely, this is a major blow to China-U.S. relations. This is one of the most serious, if not the most serious, violations of the three joint communiques between China and the United States, and demonstrates not only the large size of the sale, but also significant improvement of the quality of the weapons sold to be sold to Taiwan. And from the Chinese government's perspective, of course, this is not to be tolerated. This is to be condemned. And China has made serious representations to the U.S. government, urging the U.S. to stop the sale, or, for example, China will impose sanctions on those U.S. companies involved in the sale of weapons. Now, this will not help calm and stabilizing the cross-Strait relations between Chinese mainland and Taiwan. And in case of anything wrong happen between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, this will really create much more difficulty for the bilateral relations to be eventually solved in a peaceful way. And the tolls on both the mainland Chinese side and Taiwan side will be even more serious and more lethal. So it's not in anyone's interest at all. And the United States eventually will be proven to be the wrongdoing party for making it more difficult to achieve peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
In other words, what Victor Gao says here in the Beijing studio is that the Americans have, in doing that, taken the wrong side of history. Let me cross over to Richard White, who's standing by in the D.C. Hello, Richard. Do you think the latest sales of arms to Taiwan will make it very difficult for the two sides of the Taiwan Strait to get united peacefully?
I think the logic of the sales is to keep a military balance across the straits, and the concern is if one side or the other had military dominance, then we're more likely to see war, because then there'd be a desire to reunify through force if the costs were seen as low. But if we have a military balance, then that will discourage aggression and make any negotiations more balanced, probably more effective.
But do you really believe, Richard, that the current male-to-male comparison in terms of the equipment and whatever facilities would tip in favor of Taiwan with sales of only 66 F-16 fighters?
I think, the Defense Department has been putting out reports. I think the latest one came out in May, showing that the balance was tipping against Taiwan. This sale would perhaps, the intent is to restore that balance. I mean, if it could have been if it had been an F-35 system, then maybe you could argue that the Taiwanese had a plane that was superior to what China could offer. But the F-16 we're talking about is equivalent to what the kind of fighters that China is keeping across the border. So I don't think it'll have a major impact on disrupting the balance. If anything, it should help sustain it.
The level of mistrust between Washington and Beijing has dropped a historic low, Richard. Now, do you believe these aggressive fighters, F-16s, would only make the situation even worse? What would be the worst case scenario between the two countries?
I think that the impact on the overall relationship will be small, and therefore I don't have I mean, the worst will just be simpler, pushing it a little worse, but not a lot. My reasoning is probably that which affected the White House decision to sell the weapons, which is, as you said, the relationship's so poor. This administration sees China as a potential a military competitor, certainly a strategic and economic competitor. So there's supporting U.S. allies in the region, U.S. partners such as Taiwan, to be able to join with the U.S. to balance China's rise makes a lot of sense. The costs we're seeing as small, since China's already so angry with the U.S. over a bunch of other issues, that this one additional sale probably is going to have much of an impact. And of course, we know for the White House, these kind of arms sales are very important. So even independent of the relationship with China, they would normally approve a sale of such magnitude.
People take it for granted, Richard, that U.S.-China relationship, the most consequential one in the 21st century, is actually ensured and protected by 3 legal documents on the Chinese side. And from the American perspective, it's also protected by the Taiwan Relations Act, which was passed right after the establishment of the official ties in 1979 during the Carter administration. Now, do you think the aggressive fighters have seriously violated the spirit of August 17th document, which is one of the major landmark documents that lay the foundation for the bilateral relationship? Richard?
No, in terms of the nature of the sale, these are a continuation of the kind of sales, admittedly more upgraded, but still we've seen for many years that the U.S. will sell arms to Taipei every few years, and that's upgraded the Taiwanese defense forces. Sometimes there's more lag, sometimes there are more advanced systems, but it's sort of in the nature of what's been going on since the 1970s, with the U.S. providing some weaponry to Taiwan, but we still professing adherence to the 3 communiques, not recognizing Taiwanese independence, and or taking other actions which I think would represent a break from the kind of framework we're talking about.
Victor, surprisingly, all our humble requests for an interview with our regular guest speakers from Taiwan have been politely turned down in silence, because none of them picked up phone calls. Is that because of the sensitivity of the issue, arms sales to Taiwan? Our friends in Taiwan find it very difficult to be interviewed. What do you think of the subtle situation across the Taiwan Strait?
Well, I think while there are people in Taiwan who believe that such more sophisticated and more lethal sale of U.S.-made weapons to Taiwan will be helpful to Taiwan, there are more people in Taiwan who believe that this will further strain the relations between Taiwan on the one hand and mainland China on the other side across the Taiwan Straits, and this will make the tension even more serious. And eventually, for example, this will make peaceful reunification more unlikely, and it will increase the danger of conflict across the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait. So eventually, for example, if the worst comes of the worst, if there is more and more tension being built upon between the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan is not in a position to fight against mainland China in any way with this 66 F-16 planes or not. I think this sale will not undermine the Chinese government's and Chinese people's determination to eventually seek unification between the 2 sides of Taiwan, one way or another.
We understand the official rhetoric. We understand the official position of the Chinese mainland. Victor, let me know very quickly, do you believe our threat on the back of an alleged nationalism or patriotism to sanction American firms which are involved in the sales of arms to Taiwan will pay off? Do you think American firms will be taken aback and they will not join the next batch of arms sales to Taiwan?
Well, first of all, this is a very new initiative by the PRC government imposing sanctions on those U.S. companies involved in the arms sale to Taiwan. Secondly, this is also just starting a new pattern. Eventually, the sanctions to be imposed by the Chinese government on these U.S. firms will be more sophisticated and will be more lethal. And I would say these U.S. companies will eventually find the Chinese mainland market closed as far as they are concerned, and eventually they will find their corporate interest and their shareholders' values, for example, being diminished and downgraded rather than being enhanced by whatever they can gain from such sales of weapons to Taiwan.
Very quickly, I'd like to have short answers from both of you, Richard. First of all, what do you think of the approach by the Trump administration? You know, I'm talking about the presidential tweet. President Trump would love to use tweet to link Hong Kong with a trade deal. I mean, let's leave the arms sales issue aside for a while. What do you think of the unpredictability and uncertainty of the presidency? Do you think this will further infuriate the Chinese mainland?
Well, it is a recognition of fact, though. If the situation in Hong Kong ends badly with a lot of people killed, that will make it harder for the president to get approval in Congress or in the American public to make a major trade deal. So he is, I mean, using the tweets is unusual, but what he's saying is,
so
I think, correct.
In the understatement of my question, Richard, do you think Taiwan is a part of the deal for reaching an agreement with the Chinese mainland? Victor, I would like to have your thoughts very quickly.
No, I think this whole so-called trade war or tariff war is a wrong thing to start with. The United States single-handedly launched this trade war, and now they basically cannot win the trade war against China, and they are talking about reaching a deal with, let's say, the situation in Hong Kong as a bargaining chip. Why should China ever accept building up this connectivity between the tariff war or agreement to end the tariff war and the situation in Hong Kong? These are completely two different things. There is no connectivity as far as the Chinese government is concerned, and there should be no connectivity. If there is no trade war, the trade war itself is not in America's fundamental interest. It's bad for China, but it's bad for the United States.
Richard, I'd like to have your comments very quickly on the impact of arms sales on the local elections next year for DPP in the first place.
Right. You know, I would think that the main impact is going to be the Taiwanese economy and then how the situation goes out in Hong Kong, because as you know, many people who favor or oppose unification in Taiwan, you look at Hong Kong as a barometer of what might happen to them as if they move closer to the mainland.
Victor, what do you think of the chance of Han Kuo-yu, the sole candidate from the KMT, to win the election because of arms sales? He openly said he welcomes the arms sales to Taiwan.
I think we still do not know which party or which candidate may eventually win the election, because there are still so many uncertainties and unknowns. And for Mr. Han, whatever he say now may be his real meaning, or maybe just political maneuvering for getting into the presidency in Taiwan. So we still need to size them up and listen to whatever they have to say, and eventually I think walking the walk is more important than talking the talk for Mr. Han.
It seems everybody in the race in Taiwan wants to sound politically correct on the issue of arms sales and the cross-strait relations, but they don't perhaps realize the consequences. With that, we come to the end of the first part, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Anna Tungan and talk about the issue of white supremacy in the United States. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Recent mass shootings in the United States have highlighted not only a problem in dealing with guns, but also a rise in the troubling phenomenon of the extreme ideology of white nationalism and white supremacy, motivating individuals to lash out violently in this way. To discuss the issue, we are joined in the studio by our regular current affairs commentator, Anna Tangen. Welcome, Anna, and Victor.
Thank you.
Anna, so many people have been killed in El Paso and Ohio, Dayton. But it seems President Trump blamed bigotry and those with a mental disorder, bypassing the serious issue of white supremacy. However, the latest cover article of Time magazine associated the rise of white supremacy with homegrown terrorism. And that's very serious. What do you think of the impact of having your own domestic violence this way?
Well, let's look at the statistics. 175 people have died since 2011 in the United States, 16 active shooter situations. That means that it's more than anything since 9/11. So the main danger you face today in terms of terrorism is actually from white nationalists in the United States. What is troubling about the trend is that these white nationalists are kind of international now. You had what happened in Christchurch, Pittsburgh, London, Norway. All of these are now connected because they keep referencing each other's manifestos that they publish prior or just or release after they do their heinous acts. So you're starting to see very, very troubling patterns, which are also being echoed by those in power. Remember, Donald Trump was the one who was talking about an invasion. This was the same language that was used by this man in El Paso. He was the one who excused the people in Charlottesville by saying, "No, they're bad people on both sides," despite the fact that you had people wearing neo-Nazis saying the Jews will not replace us. A very, very strange phenomenon. He seems, whenever it comes to this issue, to be extremely soft, to always backpedal, to say, yes, I'm against it all, but these, we're not going to fund anything to really take a hard look at these people and do something about the threat they present.
Victor, FBI and Department of Homeland Security have both agreed that white supremacy and white right-wing activists are the biggest threat to the Homeland Security. However, even going back to the Obama administration, this issue, the proposal by FBI was dismissed as not so serious to the Homeland Security. Why do you think white supremacy was not taken seriously by one generation after another of American politicians and policymakers?
Well, first of all, the United States is one of those countries which not only practiced white supremacy against other ethnic groups, especially, for example, Afro-Americans, but also has institutionalized such white supremacist prejudices.
You're talking about the Trump administration?
Well, starting from the pre-revolutionary years, and also all the way till the Civil War, and also for more than 100 years after the end of the Civil War, all the way to Dr. Martin Luther King's campaign against prejudices in the United States. He was mostly talking about prejudices against Afro-Americans. But more recently, for example, when the President of the United States himself has been labeled a white supremacist, when he has demonstrated so much bigotry and prejudice and hate, for example, using race as one of the reasons, and this really stoked the white supremacist movement in the United States to a new height. And this has also confused many people in the United States, especially among the white majorities.
The question is, why didn't Obama do something about it? Here's somebody who was dedicated to civil rights, who had been an activist. And it's very simple, the optics. An African-American president declaring that he has a white nationalist problem would have been very, very difficult on a political level. People would have just said, you're starting the race war. You're making something out of something that isn't there, and that you're doing. So for Obama, it was very simple. For Donald Trump, it's much more complex. He has been using what we call these dog whistles, these terms and things like this, which are really echoing all of the things that these white nationalists are saying. Fox News, Tucker Carlson in particular, has been accused many, many times of bringing out very racist things. He had a special program, I remember back about about blacks in South Africa attacking white farmers and killing them, and then asking very, very leading questions, you know, what's this world coming to? In essence, trying to paint this as a racial conflict.
This El Paso shooter traveled 600 miles to a place that shares the border with the Mexicans, and he killed 29, a dozen or so, more than a dozen people, including Mexicans. Now, the Mexican government was very angry. He seemed to have cited the wording of invasion, a wording that President Trump often used in his tweets. And therefore, observers would associate the shootings with the advocacy of President Trump to arouse hate by building the war and separating parents from their kids. So what do you think of the relevance, if any?
No, of course. I think over the past 2 years or so, President Trump has been very extreme in his views about certain minorities, for example, Latinos to the south of the United States border with Mexico, and he has been using cursing words, slurs, for example, to condemn many people of different...
Including colored lawmakers.
Colored and different religious minorities, for example, not only inside the United States, but in Africa, in other parts of the world, etc. This not only has acquiesced with the white supremacist movement, this actually has become a kind of the spiritual leadership for the white supremacist movement. This has made white supremacy or racial prejudice not only as what originally was considered as incorrect, politically incorrect, but now it seems to be pushed to the mainstream of the society in the United States. This is the very dangerous thing, because this will...
It's not in the mainstream. I think that's incorrect, and I'll disagree with you. But what you have here is white supremacy is being used as a political issue. Remember, during the time that Obama was there, you saw the Republican Party trying to make overtures to the Hispanic community. This was a socially conservative, small businessmen who tend to be fiscally conservative as well. And they were doing all sorts of things. Remember the number of Hispanic people who ran for the presidency? This was all part of this idea that somehow the white population, the Hispanic population, would come together and support the Republican ideals. That all changed when Donald Trump came into the picture. He said, well, no, you're weakening the party. The party is white, and we're going to continue to go at these because this is the way in which we can get and retain power. Not forever, because the U.S. is changing demographically in terms of its colors. But this is the way to seize on it, things, at this point for him and maybe for a few more terms in the future.
Why do you guys think, or perhaps in my observation, President Trump has been soft pedaling the issue of gun control? Now, he talked to the National Rifle Association and may have softened his tone on the issue of gun control. What do you think of the influence of such interest groups, the lobby groups, like the National Rifle Association, ahead of the 2020 election?
Well, I think the National Rifles Association actually generates a lot of votes in the United States. This is really a big irony of the political realities in the United States. There is a constitutional amendment authorizing the empowerment of the people in the United States to bear arms, for example, but that was passed at the end of the 18th century, and the world has changed significantly for more than 200 years, and in a very sophisticated society today, to bear arms in very highly congested cities, for example, will really cause a lot of hazard for people, and it will be very natural logic for a situation like this which will trigger, fightings or
do you think
gunshots and mass killings of the people.
Do you believe what Victor says indicates clearly that gun control will be a very difficult issue, will be a mission impossible, and there will be more gun-related violence, killing more innocent people, and therefore the United States, protected by Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights, will be just a joke for the rest of the world when it comes to the ugly issue of gun-related violence.
All right. The first duty of a government is to make the people secure in their homes, in their public places, their schools, and their working environments. When a government is unable to do that and instead says you must protect yourself, get yourself a gun, all right, that system has failed. And at some point there will be a tipping point where the American people say, no, we don't want to go back to the Wild West. Remember, if you go back and look at all of these Westerns, what were they? The sheriff would come to town and he would say, no more guns in town because this is a civilized place. You don't need guns to settle your issues here. So that's when gun control started. Ironically, it's this myth of the Old West, the great equalizer, that people point to as guaranteeing their safety. It did not guarantee the safety of those people who were outside that nightclub who were killed in a matter of seconds. They had no time to pick up, even find a gun and fire it back with this man firing a high-powered, loaded, multiple magazine gun. There was no chance. So this myth that you can protect yourself if you're armed is just that.
Given the rise of a white supremacy on the back of populism and racial discrimination in the 21st century, do you foresee the rise of Islamic extremism to combat, to push back white supremacy in yet another crusade against each other, Christians as opposed to Muslims?
Well, please allow me to make two very brief points. First of all, the President of the United States should be a unifier. He's not the President of the white majority of the United States, also the minorities of the United States. He should be the President of all Americans. But in this particular presidency, President Trump is very divisive, and he is appealing to probably animal instincts among certain people, and he is really urging certain people to go onto the wrong path, to incite more violence, for example, and racial discrimination. That's
obviously,
dangerous thing.
Obviously, the whole world faces a growing uncertainty concerning extremism, be it Islamic extremism or white supremacy. That's the common enemy of our mankind. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.